All right, folks, it's time to move to the second of 3 documentaries brought to you by Steve McQueen. This time, we're going to be reviewing Subnormal, a British Scandal. And man, was this a story. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel today for another review. Today, we're going to be reviewing the film, the documentary Subnormal, a British Scandal, which is going to be releasing September 17th on Amazon. Now, this is the second of 3 films that I've checked out, so be sure to check out my first one, A British Story of Resistance. Black Power, A British Story of Resistance. That's the first one I checked out. This is the second one, and I feel like this was a good strategy in looking at it in this order, because this time now we're focusing on the education system back in the late 60s and 70s, and we're talking about the history of the British education system, and this story was eye-opening. So much information for this documentary to only be an hour. So much information, and man, just the emotion, I can almost even say the anger from watching this, I just was not expecting here. In this documentary, they talk about how black kids, people of color, were put into ESN schools, thus the ESN school scandals, and being categorized as subnormal. Being subnormal was just a strategy to remove black kids from out of the white school systems. The white school system. Parents thought that all of these foreigners, all of these immigrants being put into these regular schools was thus crippling their kids from learning, which was absolutely wrong. Statistically proven that this is absolutely wrong. So the scandal here is that they did everything to move these kids from out of these school systems into these really poor condition schools that also, they weren't just other schools. They were schools with worse conditions, and then they just also was stifling in regards to being able to teach people, because they didn't have the resources. They weren't able to teach these kids at the same level and metrics that the other kids was. So therefore they were progressing much slower. So when I say that how they were shifting them over, it wasn't just what you would think, like, oh, that person didn't test high. Of course they didn't want them to test high either, but it wasn't just that. I mean, they were using everything to make them eligible for that, or ineligible to be in a regular school. Like a one kid, they said that he had sickle cell, so they moved him to the ESN school. It's a health condition, has nothing to do with him learning, but yet that's the strategy that they were using. So in this documentary, they used every strategy in the world to thus put in these black kids into the school, which in this fact, black kids, populated over 50% of the school population, which is just horrendous here. And like, considering that these kids were just coming from the Caribbeans and other places, English wasn't even their first language. But they didn't even acknowledge that they had another language. So if you had another language, such as Creole or whatnot, they didn't acknowledge that. So therefore, English being your second language, which they trying to make it seem like it was your first language. And if you are coming to a country where English is the primary language and you're learning it at a late age, then of course you're not going to be up to par to what everybody else is for your age. And they use that against them as well too. And it's just disgusting to hear that, because they didn't even acknowledge their own culture or where they came from, which then they handicapped them from that. So kids from the Caribbean, we were able to get a glimpse of what they had to go through in this as well. And as I said, people of color, black people, everybody who wasn't white was put into this category. And oddly enough, Asian kids, same story, except they acknowledged their initial language. So they didn't really have the same type of pressure on them in this, but it's still false. So if you wasn't white, then it was an issue. And like I said, whatever it was to get them out of the school was the answer. Anything. And like about 30-40 minutes within the film, we started to get testimony from kids, success stories, which is which is also very emotional. a fantastic story of resilience, of perseverance, where these kids who weren't given a chance in society grew up now and is successful, and being able to hear them tell their story about what they went through, it's crushing. It is just crushing, and even they tear up in some of the having to rechannel some of these memories, because you could imagine how it must have been for them. So hearing the comments from them, and then also hearing comments from some of the stock footage that they showed about how there was no regards for black kids and their education. It's just flat out disgusting. They even showed like test videos of like putting kids in situations where they were asking them to like identify this, or what do you think about this, completely humiliating them, and they showed that, and it was so terrible. It's so emotional. It was just really, really bad. The British school system, they treated West Indian kids subnormal. Everybody subnormal. Anybody of color, subnormal. Any nationality that wasn't white, subnormal. That's just what it was. It was this institutional obstruction. And then, the other thing about it too is that you have these kids who are immigrants, is leaving their country, and this is the trauma that they got to deal with, which they correlated that trauma is the lack of education. So could you imagine if you were just completely removed from your family, or if you just had a bad family situation, and you get put into a school system, and they're like, that's not trauma, you're just dumb. Put them in the school, and it's just bad. They showed all of it, but the institutional racism, and it just resulted in all forms of discriminatory practices. And they were just setting these kids up to fail. That's just all it was. That's all it was. But there's just so much information poured in this. You heard about people who did investigation to prove that there was institutional racism. And that was, the second half of the film, yet, bringing to a conclusion that is a little bit more settling, because the first part is just, it will send you in a rage of just how, black people were treated in this. But I really enjoyed this one. I really can't wait to check out the third one. This is two for two thus far, and I'm expecting the third one to be really good. But yes, folks, this is the second documentary from Steve McQueen, Subnormal, a British Scandal. Check it out, folks. Jump in the comments and let me know your thoughts about this. And as always, stay tuned for more reviews very soon.